This is the TJ Hoisington Podcast. Unleash your greatness within.
That goat intestine was really bad. And the smell of it is still like, it lives in a memory up in my nose. It's just like, wow.
Hey there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. In today's success interview, it was my privilege, and I really mean that. I think this is the longest podcast I've ever done. It was my privilege to interview David Moscow.
My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
You see, what a pleasure it was to interview David Moscow. He is the author of this new book titled From Scratch. And I love the subtitle. It's what caught my eye when I decided to interview him. The subtitle is Adventures in Harvesting, Hunting, Fishing, and Foraging on a Fragile Planet. I tell you what, that caught my eye. And soon I realized why as we connected. This is the longest podcast I've ever done. So we've broken this up into two parts. And so you're going to want to watch both parts. But this is part one. And let me tell you a little bit about David Moscow. He was an actor at a very young age. His first debut film was with Tom Hanks in the movie Big. And then he was in many other movies, and he's produced several movies and shows and so forth. And I tell you what, the last couple years, he's traveled the world sourcing food and discovering where our food comes from and reconnecting with those parts of the world where we get our food and how we should be thankful for that. And we get into that in this interview. But in this part one, we go into his history of how he started as an actor and became a celebrity and so forth. And then in part two, we talk about some of the scary situations he found himself in as he was going around the world to source food. I tell you what, this is a pack-filled interview with David telling a lot of stories. I even asked him, hey, could you send us some B-roll or some film of you in these situations that you tell the stories about so that people can see what it was actually like? And he's been kind enough to share those videos with us. And I tell you what, you're going to get a lot of value out of this. It was really great to have him on the show. So listen, this interview is powerful. It's insightful. And you know what? It's meaningful. I hope you feel that. Anyway, it's just really great. It was like two friends having a conversation. So if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, hey, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and make sure that you click that notification bell so that you're the first to be notified when I come out with a new motivational message or a success interview like this one. If you're watching it on Rumble, hey, thank you for following me over there. And if you've downloaded it from iTunes or Spotify or wherever else, wherever you can download podcasts, hey, thank you for being a part of my community. Now, without any more to say, without any further ado, let's jump right into this interview. David, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
So happy to be here, man. So happy to be here.
I am happy to have you here on the show. This is a little bit different type of a show that we typically do. We have a lot of entrepreneurs, business leaders, but we also have people that just want to get ahead in life, right? So, so the everyday type of person from around the world will watch this and listen to this podcast. I have your book here, so we'll jump into that. Look at that beautiful book. Look at that handsome guy right there.
Oh, thank you.
Well, one thing that caught my eye was the subtitle. When your publicist came to me, what caught my eye about your book is it's called From Scratch, and the subtitle is what really grabbed me. Adventures in Harvesting, Hunting, Fishing, and Foraging on a Fragile Planet. The part
that took a while to build, like the idea of what sort of was the essence aside from the catchy From Scratch, but what was the book really about? And that in a way we sort of, that was the first thing we kind of figured out when I co-wrote it with my father, who's actually
John
John
Moscow.
Moscow. He's a writer on the television show that this sort of like comes out of, and that was where we started. Like, what did we learn in the 5-year journey of going around the world and harvesting food, making meals?
Well, one thing, and I thought that was amazing because in 2015 I came out with Return to Robinson Island, and as I saw the subtitle, I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder, with the stories he has in the book and so forth, how could this be related to this imaginary family? How would they have lived on an island? And you really shared some cool, and I hope you jump into it in this interview, cool experiences, interesting food that you had to eat, that you had to go source. Anyway, blah, blah, blah.
It was transformative. It unleashed my greatness within, finding I had been an actor for a long time.
Yeah.
And had grown bored. Like, it's such a strange thing to say because acting is like, you're auditioning all the time and it's highs and lows. So bored isn't really kind of a word that comes up. But in essence, the everyday life of waiting for auditions to come and sort of having other people make phone calls for you, and you have to wait to, you give your agency away as an actor a lot. You're just waiting for other people to tell you what to do. Yeah. And I had grown bored. 26 years of that. Yeah. Since I was a little kid. I was
jump into your bio. Go take us all the way back and we'll come back up. How about that?
So when I was 11 years old, I got a cast. I had done a student play in 6th grade. My mom found an open casting call in a local newspaper for a Jodie Foster film, actually called Five Corners. Jodie Foster, John Turturro. They were looking for like white kids from the Bronx. There weren't that many of us, and so I went in, and they liked me. But my family is, we're community activists, radical lefties from the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s. But so Hollywood was very low on their list of interests. We didn't even have a TV really in the house. My mom would bring the TV out of the attic for an hour a week, and really to watch MASH. That was kind of like MASH. But other than that, but she had seen that I had really enjoyed the school play. Yeah. So she found this and she said, let me take you down there. And I went in, and they liked me, and they wanted me to do the part, or at least continue to screen test for it. And my parents were like, no. so I didn't, but they had given my name to an agent, and the agent reached out a couple months later and said, can David come in and read for us? We were told that he's, at 11, it's really about like, can you read? Are you engaging? Right. And I was definitely like one of those kids who had no fear of talking to anybody and blah, blah, blah. So I went into J. Michael Bloom, which was, if kids were coming out of the East Coast, child actors, that was the agent. They really were. I think like Michael J. Fox came out of there. Like, and so they liked me. I remember I had to go in and read sides. They gave you sides to read on the spot. And I read these sides. I had no idea what the movie was, but about 3 months later, I went to see Stand By Me, and those were it was a scene from Stand By Me. So I'm watching Stand By Me. I'm like, oh my goodness, I know this.
I said that, yeah.
Right. So I went on. My first audition was for a Columbia student play. That was Andrew Jarecki was producing it. He ended up Capturing the Friedmans and Jinx, and he started 777 Film. And then the second audition was for a little movie starring Robert De Niro, directed by Penny Marshall, called Big. And so I went in, and it was like a bunch of little kids in I think it was like a community center or something, the basement of like a church. And we were all sitting on this like, industrial carpet. Penny was in a chair. We were like running around doing whatever. She'd be like, you, what's your name? Where are you from? And I went in and out. It was like, I think I only remember it because it's become like people ask about it. Yeah. But it would have been like nothing. I went in and out, half hour, done. and then I continued to act in things. I did oh my gosh, I did the number. What was Kate and Allie was the next one, and I did a recurring character on Kate and Allie. Kate and Allie was like a big show in the 80s. But 6 months later, we get this call, and they said, "Remember that movie you went out for? Well, it's now not De Niro, it's Tom Hanks, and you look like Hanks, so they would like you to come back, and they want to send you to an acting coach to see if you could actually act." So I went to this really wonderful, sort of iconic New York acting coach, Kate McGregor.
And you're how old at this point?
I'm still 11.
Still 11.
Like still 11.
Yeah.
And I was there with another young actor, Judd Trichter, who also ended up being in the movie and is now a longtime friend. He's a wonderful actor, director, writer. And after a week, she called him up and said, "Yeah, the kid's not going to suck. He can read." And so then it was sort of rehearsing in Penny's office and meeting Tom and meeting everybody. Elizabeth and then I met Jared Rushton, who I was auditioning for the young Tom Hanks to grow up into Hanks.
Yep.
And they had to do some magic. I wore like green contact lenses, which hurt like the dickens. And I had lost a tooth. I got teeth and lost my teeth late, so I was still losing my baby teeth. And so they built me like a flipper that like was almost like a inset, and they dyed my hair black. And I met Jared Rushton, who played Billy, who was my best friend, and we actually became thick as thieves. And so much so that afterwards, I would travel out to LA to act, and my only friend was Jared. So he lived down in Seal Beach in the OC, and I would go down and visit him, and we would go to the local mall, and people would get freaked out because they would see the two kids from Big hanging out at the mall, like, holy smokes.
They would totally recognize you. They would.
Oh yeah. I mean, we went to the mall for a reason. We were like, 13 or 14 and wanted them to, girls to check us out. So,
totally.
But yeah, no, Jared and I still friends. It was, I mean, to have a film like that in your life is such a wonderful, it was a gift, right?
Yeah.
Such a gift.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that changed from that point on, your trajectory totally changed, right?
Yeah. Once you do something like that, you don't stop working until you decide, really. Or at least as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Then there's all this stuff that happens when you move from child to adult. And that's it used to be a lot funkier. Now you see like kids it's much easier for them to sort of, use their young
transition
career. And actually, like, movie studios look for that. Networks look for that. Oh, okay. He was on Nickelodeon for 10 years. He's got a lot of fans. She's got a lot of fans, So, but back in the day, it wasn't like that. It was, kid actors and adult actors were very different.
Right.
And I also think that today child actors are particularly, they're really good actors. And I don't know if that was what people were looking for, in the 80s, and 90s. I think it was much more of like charisma and charm. And now you get kids, get nominated for Academy Awards, and they're just really strong actors. And so that was, I went from there. I did a few television shows. I did Newsies, which was a Disney musical where I learned how to sing and dance with Christian Bale. And then was like, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go to college. I ended up working with an environmental organization and tracked wolves in New Mexico and Arizona.
Oh, interesting.
And, the Mexican border, which was like, I did that for 4 or 5 months and was like, I got to go back to acting.
It was hard work. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you just need like, I was a city kid. I liked people and living out of Forest Service cabins. And doing prey density surveys and botanical surveys in the Mexican desert is like, just a lot of thinking by yourself in a desert. So I came back and did a Broadway show, and that was transformative for me, because I had never really built up a toolbox
of skill sets.
With skill sets, yeah. It really was like smile, show up, they hand you a check. That's great. But here, you know, if you're going to be on Broadway for 2.5 hours in front of an audience, you know, every night, you have to bring it. And there was a real conflict at the beginning. You know, I was hired, and the producer and the director were not getting what they needed from me. A lot of it was because I was up there thinking about sort of what I was going to have for dinner later. And then I would say my line. And so we got close to press night and opening night, and they were desperately trying to, at the end of the play, I'm supposed to turn to my mother, who's a visiting ghost, a specter. And I basically am supposed to say, how can I ever miss you if you never leave? And then she leaves, closes the door, and then I break down to cry. And I never was breaking down during all of the rehearsals. And
you couldn't get yourself there?
I couldn't get there. I couldn't get there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I read an interview with Sean Penn where they were discussing his sort of method acting. I think it was around, what was that high school movie that he did? Spicoli, he was so famous. Anyway, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where he bothered everybody on set because he was the character from the beginning of rehearsal all the way through the end of shooting and never broke, only interacted with people as Spicoli. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I think that may be something that could help me here. So with a week left, I was like, okay, I'm going to be this guy, this kid, and I'm going to walk around in the world like this, on stage and off stage. And I remember it was press night, and the end of the play came, and I say, you know, how can I ever miss you if you never leave? And she left, and I turned around, and it was, and there was a very nice response from the audience.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, whatever this is right here, I want more of this. This is phenomenal. And so then I joined a little theater company that my friends had, and worked on stage for the next 5, I don't know, maybe even 10 years. And really sort of built a toolbox that allowed me to, you know, when you're going up on stage every night, in different shows, and this was a small company. So like, you know, people would call you up and be like, I want to do Sam Shepard's 4-H club next week. And you'd go down and help build the set, and then you'd have a part. And so it was keeping you like really honed, and you were always being creative. And so when I had an audition, it never fazed me. And then I could bring interesting things, you know, stuff I'd been working on with a character on stage that seemed similar to this movie. And I felt like that really galvanized. It jump-started I accessed talent that I had never had before. And so actually, whenever young people ask me, like, what should I do? You know, everyone talks about an agent or a manager. I'm like, go find a small theater company where you can get up on stage. And also it's a place where you can invite people to come and watch you work. And there really is a response, right? Like, you can't hide. And if people respond to you, they tell you. And so if people are not responding to you, then maybe you should think about doing something else, because it's a hard life you're going to choose as an actor.
Let me just throw a little thought out here. Yeah, I think what you're saying is really valid. That same experience you got through those auditions and so forth, and being on the stage constantly and practicing and trying new things out, is exactly what I had in 1999 working for Tony Robbins. And in 1 year, I gave 240 public presentations inside companies, and I failed. I mean, to be honest, I'm embarrassed to think about the first couple speeches I ever gave. I'm glad they weren't filming them, because woo, I tell you, but through experience, right? People go, I get so nervous speaking in front of in front of people or whatever.
it's just like you just said, it's about trial and error. It's about getting the feedback, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And then as you do it, you realize you're more capable than you think you are, right?
Oh, totally agree. I mean, what you explained, for most things, grit is the ability to get back up,
yes,
go back out in the face of, people maybe laughing at you, throwing tomato, whatever, right?
Whatever.
To go back and address an issue that came up and figure out, avoid the traps and figure out a way to get over the hurdles. That's it, right? It's the marathon.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to jump in here. You just triggered another thought. I remember I was in Denver, Colorado, and I was with Tony Robbins, and I was asked to speak in front of a group of about 400 women. And I'm up there with all my gusto. I'm young. I have energy. And I told a story about a third-party story about someone who was in their 40s. And I made the mistake of, as I was telling that third-party story, of sort of, and I don't remember how I said it, but making the inference that 40 was old. Like, and I remember hearing the whole audience go dead silent. So going at 10,000 miles an hour in my mind as I'm still speaking on stage, I'm trying to figure out, what did I say that was wrong? What did I say that was wrong? All of a sudden, I realized I made 40 years old seem old, which offended most of these people, it seemed like. And I'm now,
and you're still up there.
And I'm still up there. And so I said, hey, listen, I tried to back off and try to change the tone a little bit and apologize. I didn't mean it that way, kind of a thing, which I should have just moved on and ignored
Forgotten about it. Then they'd forget about it.
Exactly. Yeah. But at that time, and this lady in the back of the room said, hey, if you keep digging a hole, you keep digging a hole, you're going to have to dig yourself out of it or something like that. So you might as well shut up or something like that. Right. And I was so beat red. I remember going home that day to my wife, because she traveled with me at the time. And I was but I learned to be careful and to be mindful of the audience and the age and the genders and so forth. All that plays a role. So I'm just with you.
No, I think we remember those moments on purpose, right? There's so many great auditions that, that was great. And I left it, and I don't think about it ever, but there are those 5 or 6 that are like so terrible. Those moments where you're like, okay, what do I learn from that? Right.
Yeah.
And for any type of like longevity, you always have to be sort of accessing. And that's what makes it interesting, or at least did for a long period of time for me. And then I started to meet younger people who, to be an actor, you need to, want it 120%, 150%, right? There's so many people who want this. Yes. And so you've really got to want it. And if you're not there, it'll eat you up. It'll eat you up. And the people around, your agents will notice it. They'll be like, why didn't you go to that audition today? You'll be like, and
don't worry.
And so you start to meet people who have that look in their eye that they want it. And you're like, oh my gosh, you should get this part, or you should get that movie made. And so something shifted in me where I was much more interested in sort of like being of service to creative people and, finding financing. I had been in the business for so long that people started to come to me to be like, how do you get movies made? And initially it was just like, oh, here's a good casting director. Here's a good producer. But then it's a couple times, like I was the one that really the buck started stopping with me.
Cool. Yeah.
The director or the writer would be like, so what are you going to do now? I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm going to find the money and we're going to attach the actors. And so it first happened with my dad, who was a community activist, called me up and said, a family friend, this guy Luis, who he had actually been developing schools with in New York, his kid had written about 20 pages of music for a play. And would I listen to it? And I was like, oh God, this is not a good idea. Because being stuck in bad theater, there's nothing worse. And also it was a family friend. So that's even more terrible.
Hard. Yeah.
But I said, okay. And I went down 10 minutes in. I'm like, lock the doors. This is amazing. And the kid's name was Lin-Manuel Miranda, who ended up going to do Hamilton. But before that, he did a play that won the Tony called In the Heights. And I workshopped and developed that with him for the first. I was the initial producer. I brought in this woman, Jill Furman, who her dad did Book of Mormon. And then I brought in Bernie Telsey, the casting director who had done Rent, and really developed it. And then it went on off Broadway, and then won the Tony. So that was really the moment where my agents were calling and are like, you got to go in for that Law and Order episode. I'd like, I've gone to Law and Order like 20 times. Like, they know who I am, but this time I'm like, look, I can't. We've got rehearsal, and that was the moment I stepped away, and started really being sort of a producer. Tried my hand at writing, and I think one of the things you said early on that usually you have like entrepreneurs. This is independent filmmaking. Is that you are on some level making a creative product? Well, you're making a creative product that you have to sell, and you have to convince people to invest in it, and then you have to find a life for it after it's made, and you learn stuff, and you're doing battle with all these people who have like huge studios that don't want you to succeed because you're going to take space in the movie theater from them, and then if you do succeed, they would actually like to buy you at the cheapest amount so that they can make the money on. So it's a crash course in business, which I was an actor and never paid attention to that side of it. But through over 10 years, sort of learned access to whole new talent, right? Again, by failing a lot, by like initially, because I didn't go to school for it. So it was really about like, okay, what happened in this contractual negotiation that messed things up? What can we learn better so my investors will recoup? And you start to be able to redline contracts just out of, figuring out, the lawyers you have a conversation with the lawyer at this point, as opposed to at the beginning where it's just the lawyer going through and doing it for you. And so, yeah, I developed I executive produced about 27 movies, and the production company, we won Tribeca a couple times. We had a filming competition at Cannes, Sundance. I just had a film at Sundance. We've had a few at Sundance, South by, and then that's where sort of the germination of the show, the book From Scratch, came. We had one of my investors, his wife, actually, we were kicking around ideas. And we wanted to do a documentary about how tacos and margaritas are made, really to show how interconnected people are through food. That a lot of Americans, or in the world, people think that I'm on an island, I did this by myself, blah, blah, blah. Well, it actually took 60 people to make that pizza slice.
Yeah,
so
I read that in your book, as 60 people to make a pizza slice when you track it all the way back to the source.
And that doesn't include supply chain people. I mean, how many people are on the boat that bring, the wheat over, right? So this is just a hands-on food production. And so it really changes your perspective of the world.
Yes.
It shows the hard work and the importance of the people who are in the fields, in the restaurants. And so,
let me just say here, I had a couple thoughts that I was writing down in my notes as I was preparing for this interview. And these are just TJ's thoughts. So you can just pick away at them.
Shoot.
Richness or meaning, right, not only comes from the food itself, but the rituals and the meaning that often come from tradition is one thing I learned. Like when you talk about the Maasai and so forth, I mean, there's deep traditions, and it's for many of these cultures, it's so, the food is a part of the puzzle, but it's so symbolic. That was one thought I had.
Can I add something?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
We have that. It's not just the Maasai, but apple picking, right? That's a tradition. Pumpkin patch, right? That's something we look forward to every fall, and is ingrained in our souls as like, this is a magical part of my childhood, and something that I definitely want to share with my son and now daughter. And fishing with grandpa, fly fishing, deep sea fishing. There's so many rituals around food, even the holidays, right? It's some point, whether you're religious or not, I don't come from a very religious family, but Thanksgiving and Christmas and Passover, these are meals that they define me, right? Like, huge. First time I was at Passover and said, my parents live in the East Coast. I live in Los Angeles now. And the first time I said, it's amazing being here, and it's sad that I'm going to have to go back home. And that they heard home was the West Coast. It was like, holy smokes. But these are the ritual of food. You can't deny.
No.
And the more we think about it, sort of, I get into the book, I talk about unconscious consumption, which I think is a problem, not only in food, but for this book, it's food.
Go into that.
Unconscious consumption is hurting us physically. I mean, obviously, when you drive up and get your meals in a paper bag wrapped in paper, you don't even think about it. You consume it in the car for that, that hit, right. That chemical hit, right?
Yep.
Even when you go to a grocery store, even the grocery store has moved away from understanding what it is that you're purchasing, right? What it is that you're going to consume, whether it's meat wrapped in plastic or something in a box that's got colorful pictures on it, So at some point, that separation, that distance causes huge problems for us physically, health-wise, but also community-wise, right? The people who make our food are over there, far away. And you no longer go to the butcher shop and see an animal hanging in there, or a live animal that you say, hey, I want that one. And that's just a generation ago, right? Mm-hmm. So that person is an expert. We need that person to help make our food. And now that person is behind the curtain and we don't see them anymore. And so we're able to, in a way, disrespect them, right? Migrant workers are treated terribly. We kick them out of the country randomly, and not so randomly, but these are people who, in my mind, when I worked with them, I sat there and I was like, first of all, there's incredible poverty, in agriculture around the world, like super poor people making our food. But I started to think about, like, there are these people that you always know, like, oh, teachers should make more money, nurses should make more money. That collective, we kind of agree, right? And people who make our food and give us sustenance need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
So community-wise, and we get into in the title, on a fragile planet, right? Mm-hmm. The way we treat animals, the way we treat the earth, with the distance that we've now created, we can do things that we wouldn't necessarily do, like morally. Like, I think we all walk around with a moral compass, but if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and things can go on. So what I tried to do was, and it was a personal journey for me, I eat an insane amount of meat.
I love meat too.
Oh my gosh. And I don't want to stop
reading your book. No, I get you. But reading your book made me think, okay, just be more conscious of. So explain that side of it. Be more morally conscious of the meat. You're not telling people not to eat meat. You're just saying, hey, just look at it from a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah. Well, I did a thumbnail sketch 45 years old, 2 meals a day that have meat product. And that's probably underselling it because there's meat in everything that we do that we don't think about, right?
Yeah.
Particularly there's beef products and stuff. So that's 35,000 animals that I've been part of killing. It's a crazy amount. That number is wild. Wow. That we never think about because
we don't.
It's not a face that we have to look at. So I wanted to come face to face, no pun intended, with what I was doing. And there's a lot of things that people will put up with, but killing animals is hard for people to take, and me particularly. So when I first was on this mission, even my parents reacted terribly to it.
Oh, did they?
How can you kill those pigs?
Yeah.
And I was like, you eat pork. So then they stopped eating pork to prove me wrong.
That's funny.
Stopped eating pork. I was like, you can't get away from it. You still eat fish. You still eat chicken. Like you're slaughtering animals to consume them. And you can't point a finger at me because I'm actually getting right in it. I'm getting right in it. And like, okay, this is me. I live in a community of meat eaters, my family, my extended family. Like, I don't want to leave that community because there's something incredibly hard that vegans do. And we all make fun of there's a lot of humor about vegans, but man, they're freaking brave. And like to take yourself in the face of millions of years of animal consumption and say it ends here and I'm going to be a problem at dinner. Like I'm going to have to call ahead and you're going to have to change the menu for me. Like that's incredibly tough.
Oh yeah.
Very
tough.
And I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'll get there because I do enjoy hanging out at the barbecue, standing next to the smoke or whatever. And then tasting the first cut that comes off. And so I enjoy that part community wise, but I needed to figure out how to eat meat sensibly in a way that felt okay. And so what I learned, I'll get into this. Actually didn't end up in the book, but launched me. I mean, I talk about it a little bit in the book, but I ended up having to slaughter a cow in Texas and then butcher it and take it around the world. Around Texas to barbecue. And what I came away with was, I mean, first of all, it was really heartbreaking. And the process was, you wanted to get the heck out, right? As soon as you send the air gun into the brain, the cow is brain dead, but it's still alive. Then they hang it and you take a knife and you sever and it bleeds out. The heart's pumping. And then you start to break it down. And I wanted to leave. I wanted to get out. And,
but you couldn't.
No, you have to. How could I be
a hypocrite? No.
Yeah. How was I going to live with myself if
if you can consume
the book ended right there. Grand opening, grand closing, done. I can't do it anymore. And there was like a moment where cow's still pooping all over the place. You're taking a hose and you're just like washing it out. Really? And then, you take off the skin, you remove the head, the hooves, and it starts to look like something that you see hanging like a slab. Right. And I'm starting to understand this more. It's not as painful. But even then, there's like a moment where you open up the belly and you've got to take out the innards. So what you have to do is you have to go to the anus and you have to take a knife and saw around it. Then you pull that out. You put a plastic bag on it and a rubber band. And then you push it back up through so you can remove everything out of the cavity. And the guy who was helping me, so I reach my hand in there and then something grabs my hand and I'm like, ah. And it was the worker was fucking with me. And he reached down and grabbed my hand. And I was like, but there's another moment where we got to the place where it wasn't an animal anymore. and he felt like playing a joke was okay, even though there had been just this big traumatizing. And so in the book, I talk about slaughtering a boar. And yeah, in our world today, the killing of animals is so removed from our everyday life, where it wasn't something. My mom grew up in Montana, and they had chickens. And I remember she tells stories of like her grandma would, you know, bring the chicken out, chop its head off, let the chicken go. The chicken will fly around. My mom like went to go get it and covered in blood and feathers. And she stopped eating chickens, like just because, you know, that was so rough for her. And I think it's something that humans need to get up close and personal with. If we are going to eat meat, we need to see how it's done and be reminded. And the change that happened, the change that occurred was I eat meat a lot less, dramatically. So it's smaller on my plate. It's not the main. Every meal doesn't have to be like, I got the big steak and then I got the stuff around it. Sometimes it's like it's the appetizer, or it doesn't make the dish, right? And if I do eat meat, then I pay for it. It hurts my wallet.
Oh, because what did I read? You go to or I heard somewhere in one of the interviews you did, you'll go to a place that you know they took care of that animal, that they
humanely raised.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that the people who were involved in producing the meat were paid well. And so, you know, if we're trying to break the cycle that the distance of you know, killing gives us, which is like it hurts ourselves, our body, it hurts, you know, the community, and it hurts the world, the earth. This is a good way. It came up in a very interesting way in the Philippines. So one of the things that happened on the journey of writing the book was I was asking sort of very small personal questions, you know, can I do this? You know, and we would unlock large stories. So I went to the Philippines. My wife is Filipina. And my father-in-law, George, was my guide there.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think he loved it. I think like, whenever we talk about it, he like gets very happy, and he tells his side of what occurred. Sure. So we went out on a boat. We were making patis for an amazing chef, Margarita Mansky. She has a restaurant in LA called Republique, and a bunch of restaurants in the Philippines. And so we had to make patis, which is a fish sauce. It's a fundamental, foundational ingredient in Filipino cooking, and we need to go get scad, and so we go out on a banca, which is a very scary boat to go out on. And you read all these things that like, so fishermen have the highest death rates of any career in the world. People die.
Yeah, that's true.
More people die fishing around the world than any other. Okay. And these boats, particularly, these are like the original structure of the boat is 11,000 years old. Like these are the boats. This is like where it's got the middle and then the two outrigger. Yep. This is where sort of Austronesians came down from northern Asia all the way down. And when the boat is small, it's very good. But there's a lot of the boat builders in rural Philippines they're not engineers. So they basically just take that design and blow it up. And that's a disaster. So that's not good. And so we're on this boat in wavy seas. There's a storm on the horizon, like lightning cracking. This is all in the book. And I'm like petrified. And it's a family run business, even though supposedly you can't have kids doing it. There are child labor laws in the Philippines, but they hadn't read these laws. So it's all like 13, 11, 12-year-olds fishing with the uncle. Yep. And we couldn't get any fish. We kept, we're in the South China Sea / East Philippine Sea. and or North Philippine Sea, and we're out all night, and we get nothing. And I asked the fisherman, I'm like, "Is this normal?" And he's like, "Yeah, it happens more and more frequently." And so then, is this something? So we start, taking the layers off the onion, and it turns out that the South China Sea has lost 70% of its fish in the last 20 years. And it is a third of the fishing boats in the world are there, just hammering it. And you have like 8 countries who are all in a territorial dispute over fish. Really, they'll say it's land, but it's fish, right? China's now building islands to push their territory out right up against the Philippines. 2 weeks earlier, there had been, I think, a couple of fishermen had been killed right very close to where we were. And you're seeing now that the politics of food are crazy. Like, people talk about World War III, Russia or Palestine and Israel. This area in the South China Sea is bubbling now because it's a diminishing supply of a necessary food. The whole Philippine, culture is based on rice and fish. Totally. And that is going to disappear. And if the countries separate from the territorial dispute can't reach across and say, hey, I know you think this is yours and I think this is mine, but we need to solve this problem or else there's going to be no fish for anybody. Now I'll bring it back to where this started, which was how our wallets can help. Because a lot of times we feel, what can I do? So the EU purchases a lot of fish from Southeast Asia, and they just passed laws. The people of the EU voted that they want only sustainably raised fish, which then means that the Philippines has just started building marine protected areas, which are areas where boats cannot go in. So the fish stocks come back and then grow out the boundaries of the marine protected area, and fishermen can go around there and harvest sustainably. Huge change that's happening. And so we can use our wallets with conscious consumption to affect major change, global change. And then also, in the book, we talk about the problems, but we also talk about places where people are doing things correctly. And that's like Costa Rica and Finland and Iceland doing amazing things with complications, right? Nothing is perfect. But we go into the problems, that arise. The onion keeps, there's still more layers to it,
Well, we live in a world where I do think that we got to be good stewards of the resources around us. On
purely a selfish level as well, right? Like, if you don't feel if saving the animals, saving the fish doesn't get you excited, you want to eat fish, so you must personally make a change in order for that to continue to happen.
And here's one of the benefits of that. You say in the book, and I love this, you quote a neuroscientist, Kelly Lambert, has tied modern depression to the lack of, quote, hands-on work. Physical activities that involve our hands, particularly activities that produce tangible products that we can see, touch, and enjoy, ... She goes on to say, you begin to feel more control over your environment and more connected to the world around you. This reduces stress and anxiety and, more important, builds resilience against the onset of depression.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, we have a couple acres of land, and my wife said, hey, let's get some chickens. I'm like, I don't want chickens. That's too much work. They're dirty. Yeah. I don't want to deal with that. Well, I lost that battle. And 10 years later,
Smart.
we have chickens. They're down in the back part of our property, right? So they don't create the smell and all that. But we nurture them.
Chickens are the worst smelling. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we in the Northwest. So there's a lot of trees. There's a lot of barriers and so forth. But we have them out there in a special place. We give them their worms. We try to really take care of them. But we get this protein it's like going to the grocery store every day, and we get like 12 to 15 eggs.
You're living the from scratch existence right there.
That's exactly. And I think for my kids to grow up with that, to help take care of it, to help be involved with it, I don't know.
It makes you feel good, which is exactly what she's saying.
Yeah.
It makes you feel good. And there's so many things out of our control in this sort of like larger, crazy world, that to have things that we can build with our hands, that we can maintain with our hands, that we can help grow, and that we can feed ourselves. During the pandemic, when things got fraught and people were like, oh my goodness, there were rumors in the air of, hunting went through the roof. The buying of hatchlings, chickens went through the roof. Gardening went through the roof. Martha Stewart,
and frankly, based on the time that we're filming this, just looking at some of the financial numbers this morning before we jumped into this interview, I mean, it may still come a time where some of that is useful to be totally, I think, simplifying our life. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit off here, but
no, but you're dead on. Yeah, you're dead on.
I think there's goodness to it, to not think that, oh, screw it, I can just go to the store and get it. Well, eggs have gone up. I've seen different numbers from 65 to 82% increase in the last year and a half. And not everybody can have chickens. Okay, let's make sure that's
the
clear
people in
too.
the cities, it's a lot harder.
But, absolutely. But the question is, where can you become more self-reliant? That's what stood me out about the subtitle of your book, and why I connected it to Swiss Family Robinson, because in my imagination, as I was writing that story based on a classic, right? They had to learn from scratch how to pull from the resources of the environment in a sustainable way. Because if they did it in an unsustainable way, it was only 1 generation, 2 generations away of destroying that Robinson Island. I mean, it's all fiction, but the idea is they had to learn it. So I got really into studying what kind of things would they do to preserve their livestock. Like you talked about the Maasai in Africa, the Maasai tribe. I forget what they're
the Maasai in Kenya.
Maasai, in Kenya, yes, in Kenya, and what they do with the blood. And man, you lay out in the book, I didn't realize how many different uses there are to the blood, and they can create yogurt with it. And I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, but they don't, when they take the blood, it's a way of preserving the animal, the life of the animal, for maybe later use or something else.
Right.
But using the blood and just protecting.
Yeah, they don't eat much meat. Meat eating is rare there. It's a dairy and blood society in general. Then they use there are some local plants that they're able to that they use. And crazy health wise, they're incredibly healthy. Yeah. Which you would think with the dairy and blood, you'd be like that can't be healthy, but they're actually like low rates of heart attacks and
you say in the book that sometimes they give blood to sick people and it helps make them better.
Yep. The when you're doing the mixing of the blood and the dairy, basically they take a little arrow and they shoot it into the neck of a cow, and then it spurts out and they collect it in a gourd and they mix it with dairy, and then you drink that. And that is like one of the most healthy things that you can give to somebody when they're sick.
Did you drink it?
I did not.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I wanted to know.
Thankfully, it was the gentleman's cow, and it was his to drink.
Okay.
But I did something that was just as terrible, just in terms of like, food is a very local and cultural thing.
Yep.
Food is what you like and what freaks you out. a lot of it has to do with what your mom ate when you were inside.
Oh, that's so true.
What you grew up on, right? So some places, I love lobster and pig, and people don't like that.
Well, and I lived in Taiwan 30 years ago in 1992 to 1994. I was on a mission in Taiwan, so I learned to speak Chinese, but I remember the 1,000-year-old egg. Oh, and I'm telling you, because of my upbringing, everybody was like, you should try it. You should try it. I was there's no way I'm trying that. There's no way. And I never did. Yeah.
We slaughtered a goat with the Maasai, which is something that they do ceremonially, you know, when there's a funeral or a birth or there's someone coming to write a book. So, and we ate a lot of it raw. The first part that happened is, you know, they do collect the blood. It's very important. And so we suffocated the goat till it was unconscious, which is pretty intense. And then made its incision. And then you take the flap of the neck and it fills up with a pool of blood, and then you drink from that. And then we took out kidney and ate that raw, which was really intense. And I threw up in my mouth. And Steven, who was helping me, who was the Maasai, laughed. And
that's cool.
And then, so one of the things is there's not a lot of edible plants there, but they need the stuff from plants. So they take the innards, the stomach, the intestines, and they boil that in a stew with the dung and half digested plants still in it. And then you eat the stew. And that is in my nightmares still today. Yeah.
That would be.
But they also put the ribs on a fire, and most incredible ribs. I mean, top 5 meals on a fire on a sacred mountain in Maasai, in the Mara, like holy smokes. But yeah, no, that goat intestine was really bad. And the smell of it is still like, it lives in a memory up in my nose. It's just like, wow.
So what'd you think? This is completion of part 1. There's still part 2, but I hope you really found some value in some of the things that David was sharing. I tell you what, although the full interview went 2 hours, a part 1 and a part 2, went 2 hours, it seemed like I was talking to one of my good friends, and it seemed like time passed like 15 minutes through our whole conversation. I hope you got some value out of part 1. I would invite you to get a copy of his book, From Scratch. And now I would invite you to go to part 2. In part 2 is when he shares many of those crazy life-threatening experiences where he almost lost his life, if you will, or really got injured in his process of sourcing for food. And he shared many of those videos with us so that we could put that on the screen as you're hearing him tell the story. I think you're gonna find that really interesting. In part 2, we're gonna talk about life skills. We're gonna talk about living self-reliant, and in the coming days and months and years that we're going into, and some of the things to think about going forward. I think you're gonna find it really thought-provoking and engaging. So go check it out. You should see now on your screen a box where it will take you right to part 2 of the interview, or you can click down in the descriptions. There's a link there that will take you right to part 2. All right, go check it out and unleash your greatness within.